And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm so glad all of you are joining us as we're recording live from Austin, Texas. And with me in the studio today is none other than Nicole Troup. So glad you are here, Nicole.
Thanks, Chris.
And then also is Ava's mom. We're so glad to have Catie Sas here. How are you, Catie?
I'm doing great.
Coming off an amazing Mother's Day weekend. How you feeling?
Just
honored,
tired, and
the truth comes out.
Yeah. I wish I could say so refreshed, but
yeah.
motherhood doesn't end.
Yeah,
So.
it's exhausting. All right, so what we did talk about is the way that mothers give, and so therefore you should give to God. That is yeah, we did talk about giving this past Sunday, and that's always an awkward statement or awkward thing for everybody, but I tried to put it in a way that wouldn't be quite so awkward. And I think the main issue that I wanted to show everyone is that you don't own your money, but God owns everything. To which people would say, but you weren't at my job, or rather not you. God wasn't at my job. God wasn't doing all the things I was doing. But yes, he wasn't. He was, but he wasn't doing your work. However, what he did do was give you your brain, give you your body, give you your air to breathe. And so therefore you owe him everything. And the way that I compared that is my two youngest sons sort of battle it out in life right now. And originally they had two separate rooms. My older two sons, I had them share a room really early on. So like once Jet turned like 2 years old, he was moved into a room with Austin, who at the time was like 3, and because we needed the room for the baby Titus. But when Titus came along, Titus was there, and then once we had Paxton, we didn't move. Austin and Jet continued to share a room, and Titus and Pax had separate rooms up until the point where I reversed it and gave Austin and Jet their own room, and Titus and Pax a shared room. And what we learned through that is that Titus and Pax had a view of their own room as it was theirs. In fact, Titus at one point put a sign on the door that said, "Paxton is not allowed in my room," to which then I made a new rule in the house that everything was actually mine and not theirs. And so they couldn't keep anybody out of their own room. Which the whole point of that was that God owns everything, because we as parents are proxies for God. And so you're sort of trying to train your children to sort of how to view life and stuff in that vein. I'm not sure, I was an only child, and so I didn't have that issue. And so now with an only child with Ava, she doesn't quite have that issue, I'm sure.
No, yeah.
Everything's hers.
Well, every once in a while, we'll say, so this is all, we bought this for you. It's not yours. It's ours.
Good. Yeah, it's so hard. Again, the reason why you want to train that early is because that fairness mindset, because especially with siblings, again, only child didn't have this issue, but you was one of 5.
Yeah,
and one of 6. And so you had 5 brothers.
I had 4 brothers and then one sister.
Okay,
later.
Right. So as one of 6, you had to share everything right from the get-go?
No, I mean, I kind of looked out being the only girl. And
okay.
So
yeah,
I had my own room. My brothers had to share.
Wow.
2 in each room. So I got my own bathroom.
Wow.
It was pretty great.
But there was a season where everyone had to share a bathroom, right?
Yes. So after the divorce, we moved into a tiny house with 1 bathroom, and there were 10 of us in there.
Oh my
and it was
gosh.
1 bathroom. Yeah.
Moral of the story, don't get divorced.
Yeah.
All right.
It makes everything harder.
I guess what that means is you had to learn early on that nothing was really yours, and that like a shared bathroom, for example, is that this bathroom is not mine. I have to share it with these. Yeah.
You have to get used to no privacy and no ownership of anything.
Right. And I think what happens for us in our Americanized, isolated, one of my professors at Dallas Seminary used to call bedrooms isolation chambers. Just from a missionary perspective, the rest of the world, everyone sleeps in the same room. So if you were to go to, for example, Iraq, whenever we raided a room or raided a house, you'd have all the men sleeping in a line on the floor in one room and all the women sleeping in a line in another room with children. It was wild. And
well, that's just custom?
Custom. Like that wasn't because they were wealthy people, had a big house, had many rooms, but all the men slept in one room, all the women slept in another room with the smaller children. It was wild. I was
Even
like,
husband and wives didn't sleep together?
yeah. It was weird. Now, maybe the houses I went into were like that, but all of the houses were like that. And so how you got business done was, I was very confusing to me. So, you had to go.
Yeah, when did you make time to like make a baby?
Yeah. And so that, high degree of porn problem in Arabic worlds. Anyway, so it was just an interesting factor right there. So, but what missionaries would call them, they call bedrooms isolation chambers. It's where you separated yourself from the family, and that was not a normal thing for the rest of the known world. To which I was like, how is that possible? But truly, that's kind of Western culture kind of creates the bedroom. Also, mobile isolation chambers, what he called cars, because in most of those cultures that bicycles, walking, you would have access to people all the time. Okay, anyway, I know that has nothing to do with really the talk, but it is kind of an interesting sort of mindset of kind of how our Western minds work in terms of what we feel is like necessary for a person's like livelihood, whereas for a lot of it, it's complete opposite. Anyway, but to that end, in a Eastern context, a corporate ownership of things is way easier to understand than as opposed to a Western mindset, which sort of thinks of things very individualized. So that also comes with our money. That also comes with our lives. It also comes with our salvation. Western people have a very more individually, I made a decision to follow Jesus, as opposed to an Eastern person is like, I guess we're Christian. That's what, dad's a Christian, mom's a Christian. We're all Christian here.
Yeah.
And so that's just a different mindset of a personal relationship with Jesus. So there's pros and cons to both of those. And so kind of the beauty of an Eastern mindset when it comes to wealth and money is like nobody thinks of it as mine, which is a great way to think about money, because then it takes away that greed and materialistic mindset that I think plagues a lot of our culture. So one of the things that we as we're talking about this, if God owns it all, how does he call us to use money, which is a tool? And we came up with a sermon series called Give, Save, Live, because you want to be able to give the first bit, and that's for two reasons. One, to honor God, and two, it's an antidote to greed. Save, because you don't want to spend everything you have right now. And live, there's got to be a way to budget your wealth in a way that honors God and then, blesses you and your family. Now, what we talked about is that one of the reasons why we don't is because our heart is where our treasure is. When we went to Malachi 3, which, did that shock you that I went to Malachi as like, and maybe not because you were in sermon practice and all that, but was that ever a surprise to you that we go to Malachi on a giving talk?
No, I mean, I've never actually read the book of Malachi. The only thing I've ever read in Malachi is Malachi 3:10, which is my
go-to
servant,
verse.
My servant memory verse. Or
that's your servant?
My stewardship,
okay,
stewardship memory verse.
In your discipleship path.
And I was like, oh yeah, like that's a really good verse to use for giving.
Yeah.
I think. And it's not like Malachi is one of those books of the Bible that like people are like, that's a book of the Bible? And it's like,
it's
it is.
Malachi,
it's in there.
the Italian prophet. Yeah. Okay, what about you, Catie? Like when you think giving, and maybe this is the part where you just don't think of in terms of books of the Bible anyway, but what are we thinking? Malachi, when I say turn your Bibles to Malachi, does that go,
No, I wasn't shocked. I mean, I think Robert and Debbie talk about the book of Malachi with giving all the time.
Oh, really? Awesome. All right, so Malachi is a weird book, and I'm just going to give a brief history of it because I know I'm sure everyone's thrilled to listen to it. But Malachi has 6 arguments or disputes between God and the people of Israel. Number 1 is like, God goes, I love you, Israel. And Israel's like, what? No, you don't. And then God reminds them of the promises that were given to their forefathers they still kept today, even though they have abandoned following God. Then God lays out his issue with Israel. One is that the priests had defiled the temple through offering blemished sacrifices and not upholding the law to the people. Because the thing about the Levites and the priests, they were kind of like an all-inclusive bureaucracy for taking in the tithes and offerings. They were the police. They were kind of, they were also the singers. I mean, there's a wide variety of jobs in a theocracy that the priests and Levites did. So it was sort of interesting. Anyway, there's frustration that they weren't upholding the law. They're being partial to people that they liked, offering blemished animals, defiling the temple. Okay, then God shares his frustration with the people, which was they were divorcing their wives and marrying foreign wives which were just maybe more beautiful or younger or whatever the issue was. And then they'd end up
Maybe
following their
just more
gods.
eager to do what they wanted to do.
You know, they just kind of...
I mean, why do old gross men order, what are the brides that order?
RussianWives.com?
Russian order brides.
Yeah. Mail order bride.
Mail order brides.
Yeah.
Brides, not bribes.
Like, yeah, let's just order a bride that's going to do whatever I want her to do.
Yeah, right. And I think that's what they were doing. And they divorced their own wives with their own children. And it was... Not that I mean, can you imagine a culture divorcing their wives with their children?
What a bunch of jerks.
Yeah. So that is clearly people haven't changed. And then the next dispute is where Israel gets frustrated at God for the injustice they see. Well, okay, if he wants to follow you, well, look at how the wicked people, the clearly bad people over there are getting away with it. And us as the not so bad people aren't. To which God says, oh yeah, I'm going to bring justice. And he's going to be like a refiner's fire, and referring to Elijah would one day come. And then back to God, he goes, listen, I have a desire for your heart. Return to me. And then they're like, well, how are we supposed to return to you? And then that's when he goes, in your tithes and your contribution, which is sort of a wild thing. I mean, like, if you're estranged from your spouse and you go, return to me. How should I return to you? You'd think like, well, get on a plane or come over here. But if you would say, give me money, that would be like a weird thing. However, with God, that because there isn't a place to go near, like remember, you're supposed to draw near in your heart. And the best way to show that you're drawing near in your heart is with your finances, because I think that's the part where you have to trust God, whom you cannot see. And it's the only, how do you tangibly draw near to God? Give, which is like a weird deal, right? Whether that's you're giving to a poor person or you're giving to the church or you're giving to an organization, it's your benefit, my expense. I trust you, God, with my finances.
Yeah. I also read a book. Well, I read half of a book.
Which book was this?
It was like Your Money Matters or something like that. I don't know.
Must have been riveting.
Yeah. Well, hence why I only read half of it. But he was talking about this, like the biblical principles of giving specifically, and he talked about how giving is a form of worship.
Yes.
And he also talked about how what you have is not yours, it's God's.
Right.
And all of that and changing your mindset about it. But that was a really big thing for me, hearing that.
Why?
Because you don't think of, when you think of worship, you think singing in church and reading your Bible.
Right.
You don't think of giving money as worship, but it is our modern day form of the sacrificial offerings.
Right.
And that
pay
was
for the things you worship most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all money, especially in American culture, can quickly become an idol. You know, it's driving your life and you're worshiping it.
Yeah.
So giving that over to God means that you're putting God ahead of this material thing that could be an idol in your life. Yeah.
So Catie, talk to me about when you became a Christian at this church, what was giving like for you? Was that an auto thing or what? We have to tell me how you responded to that.
I at first thought I can just serve. I'll just tithe my time, which that's not really a thing.
Right.
It kind of took me a little bit to realize it's not a thing. And that giving money is a very tangible way to show that I trust God.
Yeah.
And so it started small. It started really small. And it was just every month it would what's the auto draft?
Auto draft.
And it would just come out of my account every month, but it was not a lot.
Right.
It wasn't I was okay, what's 10% of my income? I didn't do the math.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of thought of, it was actually Ben Overby that was the whole, he sat down with me and he was like, hey, so how are you feeling about giving? And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't. So we talked about it. And he's like, small is great. Small is great too, just to get started. And so I was like, okay.
Okay, yeah. So what was really interesting is back in like early church days, what Christians were known for was their unbelievable generosity. And so in the days of when Christianity was just starting to blossom, there was this quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit, but it was like, we are going to, as Christians, we share our table, but not our bed. And in that culture, in that time.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so share our table. So we share our food, which,
like inviting people in to have meals with
have
you.
meals and providing for other people.
But like, what's the deeper meaning behind that? Share our table, but not our bed?
Yeah, but not our bed. So, okay, in the first century, second century, third century, people were very like, hey, let's have sex. It sounds good. Like there would like, hey, will you have sex with me? Oh, well, you asked. I guess so. Is very like open sexually. All right. And so what made the Christians unique is that they would not share their bed. There was a holiness factor going on,
Okay.
but they would share their money. So as the culture shifted where it used to be that your body was sacred and sex was sacred, and that became common. And so money became the thing. I'm not going to share my money. You're not going to know how much money I have.
Yeah.
And so that, it's wild. Again, I think today, and we've talked about this in many sermons, that people are more apt to talk about like sexual relationships of the past, current sexual struggles they're having now. And then when you get to money, it's like, I don't talk about that. Mm-hmm. And that to me is sort of, when you think about like the amount of, that's because what we've made holy is money. What used to be holy, and again, in the culture, pendulum swings all over. So,
well, anytime somebody doesn't want to talk about like how much money they make or how much they give, I just thought maybe to me that just looks humble. Like they're like, oh, I don't, I just want to. That they're not trying to make anyone feel bad by being like, oh yeah, I make this much money or I like give this much. They're not trying to look self-righteous.
Sure. So that gets into, and I love that because there's, in Proverbs it says like there's a one who looks poor but is rich.
Well, don't let your left hand know what your
right hand is doing. Yeah,
but that's only in
Matthew.
relation to giving to the poor. This is where we took something that was good and we made it apply to something else. So for example, let's walk through giving, right? So how do we know that what Barnabas gave to the elders of the church? You guys remember this? It's Acts chapter 4. He comes, he sells a piece of land, brings the profit from it, puts it at the feet of the elders. And then they're like, that's amazing. And then Ananias and Sapphira come by.
Oh, yeah.
They do the same thing, but say the wrong number or like lie about the number, and then they're killed off. How do we know about the woman who gives her 2 coins into the treasury? That was the poor woman giving to the rich, which is sort of odd to think about. But she was giving to the temple, right? Mm-hmm. And so Jesus
she gave
makes
all she had.
She gave all she had. So Jesus makes a comment on something he can see physically. Whenever the Pharisees they tithe 1/10 of their cumin, the dill, anise, whatever that was. And then he says, you should do that without neglecting mercy and justice. So clearly everything that they did those things in public. And then Jesus says, here's the problem with the Pharisees is that you guys like to make loud showing that you're giving to the poor so you get credit from people about how holy you are.
During your sermon, there was a part of me that kind of felt like, I don't want people to think that you're just up here bragging about how much you give and like, oh, look at these good things that are happening in my life that like, oh, well, I was like bold and courageous and I'm trusting God and we're going to give 20%. And like I know that you were trying to explain God's faithfulness and you were sharing of like, God does not give because we give, but God gives because he is a good and giving holy God that provides for us and is always faithful. But there was part of me that was like, oh man, like what if people are thinking, you know, oh, he's just up here like bragging, being like, look at me, look at what I'm doing, do what I'm doing so that you can receive these gifts. And
right.
like,
so I think it's more, and it's a great point, and that's the concern Adrian has every year. Is you're just doing this because you want people to think you're awesome.
Yeah.
To which you know, gosh, is
Like
there
I knew that that's not what you
right?
were doing.
But is there probably
but-
part of my heart that's like that? Maybe. But
You also have talked about how difficult that is.
it's very difficult. But the one thing you don't hear me talk about is my giving to the poor. So that's the thing. Like I don't talk about my
So giving to the church is one thing, but then we don't brag about how much we're giving to the poor.
Exactly.
Well, I don't think you brag at all in general about giving.
Well,
but
giving to the church is a witness. Giving to the church is a witness of your stewardship before God. Giving to the poor is like a secret thing that you do between you and God to bless somebody.
Because 20% is like substantial.
It's crazy.
Like 20% is a lot.
Is not what people like. There are people that barely give 10%.
Right. Or,
Like 10% is like a.
well, you know, the average of the nation is like what I think it was like 2,700 or something a year. And so when
we give like 39 or something like that.
Yeah, and our church gives way more than that, which is really exciting. But yeah, it's the average that every church gives is every normal attender in a year, church attender gives $2,200, almost $2,300. And then the average giving per attendee at Wells Branch Community Church is about $1,500 more than that.
Yeah.
Which is that's a great thing.
That's really cool.
So, but what that means is there's probably some people giving a ton and some people that are not giving very much, and who knows on what percentage that is? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
I think we do kind of have a disparity in our church too between like there are some like very, very, very like wealthy, successful people. Who give like wealthy, successful people do. And there are some like very not as wealthy people.
Who give generously or?
I think both like generously or just whatever they feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that's why you see the like, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is I'm blind to what people give, which is kind of nice. Sometimes I wish I knew that because it's again like I know people's like sordid like sexual sin, but I don't know their giving history.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, it's like so, and that's to prevent me from.
Why wouldn't you be able to have access to that?
Because what the elders are afraid of, and I think
who has access to knowing that?
I do.
Nicole. So
wow.
that's where the blind is. So Nicole knows and has to go through and like, you know, send out giving statements and like here's what you gave this year and all that, and so she's the only one who knows that.
That is wild.
Well, Melanie does too because she helps me. But
yeah, so but
it's
the
really,
elders,
it's really limited knowledge.
None of
like
the
the elders don't know. Chris doesn't know.
Yeah.
Like the rest of the staff doesn't know. Like that's
Right.
not open information. We're not just like.
and it's to prevent me from being partial to like I don't know, Randy Rich guy over there that is like because you just don't know and
and you don't want that to lead how you treat people.
right because it'd be weird, right? Like I don't know.
I think the thing about money too is that it corrupts very easily.
Sure.
And I think that might be why we are so careful
I used to think I was beyond that. I don't think I'm beyond that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you're trying to get a building built, I'm just like,
Yeah.
you know, if that person would just give, you know, but I don't know what they have, so I don't know, right? So it's a blessing.
Yeah.
But it sort of, I think, prevents the hard conversations about, which is why discipleship becomes so important. You've got to be talking about giving somewhere, or else it becomes like this isolation chamber of your life that nobody knows about. And so we brought it in my community group last night. It was talking about financial sin, and I don't think I'd ever heard that term before, financial sin. And I thought that was wild, but I guess that's what it is because greed, we all agree is sin.
Yeah.
But, you know, so knowing you have financial sin, that's a thing. That to me was sort of a...
Like knowing what you should give and not giving.
Right, but the hard part about that, financial sin would be only something that God
convicts you of.
Right. And this goes back to the sin
it's
of...
a very personal thing.
It is a personal thing, but it's not a private thing.
Yeah.
So and I think what happens for a lot, it's like my salvation. My salvation is personal, but it's not private.
Right.
And I think this is where my giving is a personal thing, but it's not private. Which is why, okay, how about this? How many, like I don't want to get on, but presidential candidates will have all sorts of crazy affairs, but that's not what people care about. What they care about is their finances.
Yeah.
Isn't that, like people with...
And there are like all of these rules about like giving to like political campaigns and
but you
when
can cheat
you can
on your
give
wife,
and
have
how
be
much
divorced,
you can give.
whatever.
And,
that doesn't matter. That's not what matters. And you're like, but doesn't that show a level of faithfulness or faithlessness that you're really be concerned about? So anyway, it's interesting that even culturally, people are okay with sharing the bed, but not necessarily sharing the table.
Yeah. We've given too much power to money, I think, is the biggest part of it.
Yeah. But to your point earlier of what you were saying, of like, you get nervous that, you know my heart, and I appreciate that because you and I have known each other for forever. But people might come off of like, he's just getting up there bragging. I
didn't want it to sound like a prosperity gospel type thing. And you even said that, like you were even like, I'm not that guy.
Right.
This is not that church. We don't say give to receive.
Right.
But like your story was so like, I give and I get all of these. Like God is so faithful to me. But then
my AC also went out.
It's
right,
not
like you faced some like very difficult
Austin
things.
had a hand surgery, and now I have to get into this like MediShare because we're on MediShare, and so I have to like call them and be like, "How come you won't give us the $1,800 for the hand surgery?"
Yeah. But like I also have to remember that like prosperity gospel type churches that say like give to receive a new car,
right?
Like give and you'll get it. Like that's it. You were not talking like that, but it was like hard to not feel like it. It was the same like kind of model, but you were talking about God's faithfulness and sharing God's faithfulness in your life, even though you had decided to give this amount of money, you were still taken care of. And that was the point.
And I think that's the thing, right? So like, again, it goes back to, it's about, my car right now is, it's a 2010. And it's time. We're at 166,000 miles, and there have been a couple moments where the engine, the serve engine light, the check engine light had been on, and it just went off, and I was like, oh, that must mean we're good. It's kind of like when you're riding on E for a while, and I'm just sort of holding out till I can save enough money because I want to get a car that will last another
10 years, 12 years,
longer. I want to go for
15.
15. I'm going for 15 years. It's kind of what my hope is, that this will be a 15-year car. Anyway, and so I think that's where there have been things that Adrienne and I have sacrificed. Like Adrienne, God bless her, she scraped the entire side of the left side of our car against a toll booth. Have you seen it?
Really?
Oh, you've never seen it?
The van?
The van.
No.
Like the entire left side. A couple years ago,
Oh yeah, I noticed it looked a little dingy, but I didn't really know how it happened.
Yeah, so Adrienne's like, can we get that repaired? I'm like, no. I'm like, that's, we're not going to spend money on that because are you going to spend money on now granted, again, if somebody goes and fixes their vehicle, am I thumbs down? No, please do it. Go.
I mean, it's all about priorities.
For you, you're just like, shoot, that's not something we can do right now.
Right, and that's the difference between someone that I think is prosperity gospel. It's like, oh my gosh, you can't look like you're not blessed. Right? So I think the blessing is, but maybe sometimes there are people who would be like, yo, that's not honoring God driving around in that thing. I don't know. There might be people who would say that. And so, it's all a personal conviction on those kind of things. And so I'm not thumbs down on a nice car. That's not my deal. But what I am saying is like, when you give generously, then you're going to say no to certain things in your own life. And you've got to be okay with that. I think one of the harder things for me to be okay with is like, how in the world are my kids going to go to college? Like that's the part that sort of freaks me out, because that's the part where we're like, I'm doing retirement in college, man. I don't know if I value college anymore. There's that kind of thing. But for my mom, that was such a big deal that I could, when I graduated high school, I had the opportunity. Now, thankfully, the Army paid for my whole college experience. But there was a part of me that was like, I felt like my mom made it so I could go anywhere I wanted to go when it came to college. Now, that money came back around in seminary, which I was really grateful for. But does that make sense? And so there's a part of me that feels like, man, I have 4 children. I don't know how in the world I'm going to get them to college. Yeah. That makes sense.
In marriage, there are a lot of sacrifices that we've had to make.
Right.
Of like, okay, my priority, like sometimes I get so annoyed because I'm like, oh man, we like can't afford to go on like this vacation, or we can't
Right.
afford to do this, or like Ryan has to say no to a lot of the things that I'll bring up that maybe one day we could do, or
Right.
maybe we could go do this or buy this, or oh, we need one of these, and but my biggest thing that I've had to come to terms with is as long as we are giving, that's good.
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm going to honor my husband and go, okay, yes, you might say no to a lot of my ideas of things that we could do that are fun. And
Yeah.
we are very tight in a lot of ways, budget wise. But we give. And Ryan, so that's why I've had to like draw the line of like, Catie, you have to be grateful that you married someone who is a generous giver.
Yeah.
Adrian has the same feelings, right? And to be fair, what's been really cool with her is for a while she would, I don't want to say battle, that's not the right word. She would discuss giving every year, and I was like, I really feel like the Lord's calling to go 1% more, and she'd be like, is that, she would go, I think you're just doing this because...
Is that necessary?
Yeah, like you just want to do this so you can tell the church that you're giving 1% more. And I was like, no, I really feel like this is God's thing. I feel like it's honoring him. And like this year was the one point where I was like, man, I really was like, am I doing this for me? And then when I watched God come through, and because I created a spreadsheet.
Because it's all his anyways.
It's
like,
all his anyway, right.
Why are we so stingy with things that
Well,
like,
it's just
aren't
like
even ours?
is God really going to come through?
Well, it's like, yeah, it's a fear of not being able to have enough. And when you've had to depend, like when you felt like it's all been on you to provide for yourself and there's like a disconnect between like, you think that it's you, but it's actually God that's providing for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like people will say, well, like, God wasn't there with me at my job, but like, no, God gave you your job.
Yeah.
God gave you the ability to do whatever it is that you're doing. And I think speaking personally, that's what it always has been for me.
yeah.
And as a single person, I don't have a husband to tell me no, unfortunately. Like
And
that,
you're not even like you
I
don't
would
even have to
love
be held
that.
accountable. Like you don't have to be held accountable for
To anyone.
in such a personal way for giving.
yeah.
Right.
And that's where discipleship comes in.
Yeah.
And I think
And-
that's why you need that.
I'm pretty open. I mean, money is like, my parents didn't teach me like money skills really. And so I'm just like, I need help with it. Like, I don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
so getting to talk to Chelsea and Leah about that was really great. And when we got to giving, I was able to talk about all my things. And Leah was like, well, you should just set up a recurring like ACH
Yeah.
thing. And then like, it's not on
You don't
you
even
to
have to
hit
think
the
about
button. Like, it's just going to go.
Right. Right.
And that's been, I mean, again, like it started out small because I'm nervous, but
yeah. And I think
it's there and
Thi-
I can increase it as God calls
Yes.
me to.
so I think
It's a muscle.
It is
Yeah.
a muscle. And it's like, so you should operate in the measure of faith that the Lord has given you. Let me find that's the Bible verse that comes up to me.
Mine is the sparrow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Give it to me.
Oh, and the mustard seed.
Well, no, God provides for the sparrow.
Oh,
And so obviously you are way more valuable than a sparrow. And so like the sparrow never worries about whether it's going to eat or not.
yeah.
Yeah, Romans 12:3 is, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So God has assigned me, and I know that this sounds bizarre, at this point, 20% faith. Now, to get to that, I had to, I asked God, and it was a thing, and I grew my faith by a 1% giving piece each year. And so, maybe next year I can get 10% more giving faith. But I think that's why it's not if everyone would just do this, because you don't have faith to do it, God hasn't, and it's not because you're not awesome, God hasn't assigned you that faith. Remember, everything we do is grace. And anytime you operate outside of grace and you get into some sort of legalistic formula with God, that's the prosperity gospel. Like, if I do this, then God will do this. And if God hasn't given you the measure of faith to do that, and so therefore you're giving to get as opposed to giving to give, then that can sort of like gets things weird. And so what I always say is like, I want to give so I can raise my standard of giving, not necessarily my standard of living. And because imagine, one of my favorite people, RJ Letourneau, dead guy from forever ago, but Laterno University is named after him. He gave 90% of his income away. Now, I don't know if he gave 90% after he was a bazillionaire, and so 90% was like nothing. But I remember hearing that, and I was challenged, like when I was like, still in the Army, about 25 years old, and I was sitting down, I was like, imagine if you just started giving like that. And I was like, who could do that? How could you even get to...
That is insane.
But
living on 10%.
Living on 10%, and then...
It's like completely flipped.
It is completely flipped. And he was, he had so much money all the time, and just blessing after blessing after blessing. And then you go... That's crazy, because he was a great steward of that. But do you guys remember a couple years ago whenever I said, hey, God led me to give $100 to some random person, like just to go to the apartments and give them $100. Well, people gave me thousands of dollars to give away. And you know what? It was miserable, because I had all this money that I had to figure out who I could give it to. And that was challenging. That was like a weight. Because I'd have like just hundreds of dollars in my hand. I was like, man, who am I going to give this to? I'd be praying about it. I'd be staring at it. I'd feel guilty for having it. Not guilty, but just a weight of having it and feeling I need to give this away at some point. And that became arduous. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so what started off as like fun, giving away money, and then I had more money that I knew what to do with to give it away, it became sort of like, crud, when am I gonna have time to go to an apartment complex or go to Walmart or go to whatever to give this? It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Is that the time when you sent me to Walmart?
Yes.
to give $100 away? Yeah.
That was fun. But like, if all of a sudden you're doing that all the time, then it's a lot of weight to carry around. And like, and then like, eventually I just said, screw it, I'm gonna give this person $500 and be done with it.
Yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
I just want to give it all away right now.
I want to give it all away right now because it's a lot of weight to carry. Now, I think now that I'm at whatever this level of giving with the church, that's been great. But what made it funny is being responsible for other people's money to give it away was exhausting.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Like that time when Aaron gave each of us $300 to give away. Yeah. That was very stressful for me.
So Aaron Swanlin, sweet Aaron Swanlin, you know who he is.
Oh, I remember the story.
Yeah. He gave everybody on staff, which was like, at the time, it was like 7 of us, $300 each, and we all had to give it away.
Yeah.
And that was like, I was like, here we go.
Like out of his own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Out of his own money.
Out of his own money.
Wild. And I feel like everywhere that kid walks, he's blessed. I mean, he's just like, he lives in this happy land of blessing. Not that they say he doesn't have his own struggles, but man, it's just, you're like, you are joyful.
True.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Anyway, I don't know where we went with all that. But
I don't know, but we were talking about giving, so it's on track.
We nailed it. All right. Okay, so we didn't have any question, but we did have a comment. And I thought this was sort of fun. And so let me see if I can pull it off right here.
If you have questions about giving, it's not too late,
Yeah,
because we can answer them later.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you can text us in at 737-231-0605. We would love to hear from you.
Yep.
And here's one comment. We didn't get questions, we got comments. Your sermon today reminded me of one sermon many years ago where some Roman guy was pushed to give up his treasure to Rome, and he showed his believers. You did the exact same thing. Pretty incredible and moving. And what he's referring to, which is sort of funny, and when that's like an insider. That's St. Lawrence. All right. So St. Lawrence was a martyr, and back in the early days of the church, they knew he was the deacon. They knew he was the treasurer, and so the Emperor Valerian said that he wanted the church shut down, and he ordered this guy to bring all the treasure of the church, and so he did. So he brought all the treasure of the church, but first, he gave all the treasure away to the poor. And then he brought all the lame, all the poor, all the people that the world threw away, but God treasured, to like the square in front of the emperor, and said, here is the church's treasure, which is fun, right? And so on Sunday, we did a little video called Thanks for Investing in Me, where all the people who had been baptized within this past ministry year,
it was so good.
It was so fun, and they just kind of told their story real briefly. Thanks for investing in me, and that was moving for me. That the treasure of the church isn't how much money we have in the bank account, but it's the souls that God has gifted us through our evangelism efforts, and they are now part of God's treasured possession. So that was fun. Yeah, that was fun to kind of share that and experience that on.
I thought that was really inspiring. Of like, this is why you give.
Right.
Like, this is our heart. This is why we love giving sermons.
Yeah.
Like it's going to people. You know, like, I mean, I think our benevolence ministry is the greatest example of that. Like that money is like, we use it to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the community. And we've had people who have received that benevolence come into our church and be saved.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which is like huge fruit.
Yeah. In fact, man, this is sort of wild. One of the people that we've recently helped in benevolence, her sister watched online, and her sister is a lesbian married to a woman. And so I said, hey, listen, we will help you regardless of sexual anything, but I just want to go over the gospel real quick. And I said, you know that Jesus died on the cross for you and rose from the dead? She's like, I don't really know what that means. So I kind of walked through, Romans 3:23 means we're all sinners. Are you a sinner? Yes, I'm a sinner. Romans 6:23, the wage of sin is death. What do you think that means? Well, I guess hell. Yeah, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus. So the gift is heaven. God demonstrated his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So like, even in your sin, he dies for you, and then you get to receive it. And if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And she's like, okay, I'm up for that. And I was like, well, part of that is recognizing that Jesus died on the cross for your sin. And in our church, we think that homosexuality is sin. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm married to a woman. And I was like, do you recognize that that's sin? And this is the part where it's just like such an awkward conversation.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm just going for it. And she's like, yes. And like, she's come to our church before.
That's huge, the fact that she said
yeah.
yes.
She's come, and the first time that she came to our church, I did 1 Corinthians 11, which is men dressed like men, women dressed like women. And she was a woman dressed as a man. And I was like, it was one of those messages I'm preaching. I'm like looking at her, and I'm like, oh gosh, I wonder how this is landing.
Yeah.
And after this, and it was like several years ago. After the service, I go, hey, what'd you think? She's like, I liked it, and I was like, okay, it was bizarre. And then, so it was Monday. So yeah, so it was the day after the giving talk. She texted in Jesus to our Pastor Plek's podcast. And so I followed up, and that's when I challenged her on that. And so then I said, well, I'll walk you through how to take the next steps, but I want you to know that this is crazy and amazing that you are willing to kind of follow Jesus in this way. And she's like, I've been experiencing a lot of things. And I go, and I know it sounds weird, have you experienced anything demonic lately? And she's like, yes. And everything has been upside down. And I said, I think that has something to do with a lifestyle that doesn't honor God, and that you're experiencing like uncovering of like people who love God covering. When you become a member of a church, when you're a Christian, one, you get spiritually attacked, but you also have the covering of elders, and you have the covering of people praying for you. And I know that seems like spiritually like mumbo jumbo, but there's just this reality that happens. Anyway, so she gave her life to Jesus, and I'm excited for the next step, which is her getting baptized. And we still need to probably talk through a lot of what repentance looks like, of like, can I have my roommate be the same girl that I'm married to? I'm sure we're gonna have that conversation. And it's challenging, but it's wonderful. And like, it's amazing for someone to sort of recognize, and that came from a giving talk, which is sort of wild. And to think of that's God's treasured possession includes this woman whose life has been so confused, probably because all the abuse or all the stuff, or just life's been hard. So that was a powerful experience for me on Monday.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Wow, I got teary.
Yeah. Okay. All right, listen, we love to talk faith, culture, and everything in between here. If you got a question about giving, or you want to talk more about anything, we would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And would you mind sharing, subscribing, liking, doing the things on whatever platform you are watching, listening to this podcast on? We'd appreciate it. So from our house to yours, have an awesome week.